Welcome to Breakthrough. On today's episode, we have Asheesh Bedi from Chicago, Illinois, and Brian Werner from Charlottesville, Virginia, to share technique pearls on glenoid positioning and depth of reaming for glenoid component placement during reverse shoulder arthroplasty. Asheesh and Brian, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. So today, Asheesh and I are going to review a plan in VIP and also discuss the new depth of ream instrumentation. So if we take a look at our plan in VIP, we can see the patient's native version and native inclination, and that's often what I'll use to preliminarily decide which base plate I'm going to use. For this patient, it looks like a standard MGS base plate will work quite well.
Yeah, so Brian, first things first, as you're going through this plan, how do you decide on the base plate, and do you use a post or a screw?
So the base plate diameter, I typically use a 24 millimeter base plate for essentially every single patient. For this amount of deformity with relatively low amount of inclination and version, a standard base plate worked pretty well for me. When I'm using the standard MGS base plate, I typically go with a screw, but I really do like the post fixation. It works quite well. So if we look down over at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, we can see our different implant options. And so we have our MGS base plate we can choose. We also have other base plate options. We then can decide on whether we're going to use a screw or a post. We can choose whether we're going to use an augment or not, and then also decide on the length of our central screw or our post.
Yeah, I love that feature, Brian. It's so hard to see contact area and seating in the OR. For you, how do you decide, as you're maximizing that backside seating, how much bone of reaming is too much bone?
So it's obviously a challenging balance between removing bone and getting good seating. And so there's a couple of different algorithms I like to use. Pat Denard has suggested a great algorithm where he uses 15 degrees of retroversion or more. He's often considering using an augmented base plate in that patient. And so then also we want to look at the millimeters or the depth of reaming that we're taking. I don't have a strict cutoff, but a general guide that I like to use is about 5 millimeters for depth of ream. If I'm reaming more than 5 millimeters, I'm leaning towards using an augment. And so we're pretty happy with our plan here. We've got good correction of our version inclination. We've got great backside seating at 93%. So let's move on and take a look at that depth of ream instrumentation tray.
Just looking at the tray here, you can see at the top is your pilot reamer. That's going to be what's going to help to set that depth of ream that correlates with the plan you shared. As you get to the next row, you have everything you need. If it's an anatomic replacement, on the left side are the secondary reamers for the vault lock. On the right side are the secondary reamers for your MGS base plate, and then a common drive shaft there at the bottom to work for both. So everything we need is here. And then a little closer look at this pilot reamer. You can see this makes it easy for your staff. You simply dial in that depth and it correlates with a letter that correlates with your plan.
And so for our VIP plan for this patient, we got a depth of E that was printed on the VIP plan. So you can see here, we've dialed in the pilot reamer to E. So let's take a look at this in action, see it on the patient. So we have our cadaveric specimen. We have a great en face exposure of the glenoid. We're using the 5D targeter as we typically would anyway to get the central pin in place. Then we bring in our VIP pilot reamer. For this cadaveric specimen, we set it to C. That's what was needed for depth of ream on this patient. And then we place it over the guide pin and do our depth of ream.
Yeah, this is great, Brian. It has a positive stop that, of course, correlates with that letter C. As you'll see, the reamer will go through here, but it'll stop at that preset depth. And then you have this view. You can see right there the bottom of that hole. That's ultimately what's going to become flush here with this secondary reamer. You can see the positive stop at the back of that reamer that correlates with that pilot hole, and then the fins on this secondary reamer that do the work. In the past, you didn't have that positive stop to give you that feedback here, but at this point, this is going to ream right down to the base of that pilot hole.
And so compare this to some of your cases before you had depth of ream. You can see how excellent of a job that it does. And so if we look here, it minimizes the amount of reaming we need to do so that we're not getting into the subchondral bone. So you can see that we didn't violate any of the subchondral bone at all. And then also that pilot hole is reamed away after you're done with the reaming. So you can see no pilot hole. So this really maximizes the amount of seating you get, the amount of reaming we do, but also minimizes the amount of bone removal.
Yeah, I love that, Brian. It basically is your positive confirmation that you've gone to the right depth and it's flush, but you have a great subchondral surface to support your base plate. Let's take a look also at how this works with our augmented base plates and how this system can work there in a sawbones model.
Excellent, Asheesh. So if we see here, we've already used our 5D targeter at VIP to place our central pin. We then use the VIP pilot reamer to drill our pilot hole, similar to how we saw in the previous section. Now we need to take a little closer look at that augmented VIP reamer. You can see that we have the depth stop that will give us our positive stop, and then the angle of the augmented reamer. And so this will be really important as we translate our plan.
Yeah, and then as you pointed out, Brian, you want to have that black line on your angled reamer align with your area of deformity where you want to place your wedge. In this case, we're angling posterior-superiorly where that defect always or often is.
So now we can take a closer look at how fantastic a job it did at reaming. And so importantly, first, you'll notice that there's no subchondral bone that's been violated. On this sawbones model, the subchondral bone is pink. Another important thing to note, Asheesh, is that when you're doing this pilot reaming with the augmented system, you're going to see a little bit of that pilot hole after reaming, and that's expected. That'll be eliminated after you ream for your central post.
Gentlemen, that was a great demonstration. So what would you say is your main take-home message?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I definitely think there's a few key points for me. You know, as VIP technology has evolved, it initially started kind of as a preoperative planning tool, and I think this instrumentation has been transformative to change that from planning to execution in the operating room.
Yeah, I completely agree, Asheesh. I think for me, in addition to that, it's making it a reproducible case every single time. We have great planning tools, we have great instrumentation, we have great implants, and now it's something that's reliable and reproducible every single time. So the transfer technology has really helped my practice.
Thank you again, that was great. Now, to learn more about optimizing reverse shoulder arthroplasty through advancements in planning, be sure to tune into our other breakthrough episodes, including highlights on making the case, challenging cases, and the learning curves. Thank you for joining us.